That the lab from a couple weeks ago is finally in the discussion board. I chose a topic, and so if you scroll down, you should find death with dignity. This is the topic for lab from 2 weeks ago, where people sent me links, and I chose one. I see that the link isn't really live in here, but if you cut and paste this link, watch that or read that article, and then contribute to the discussion. Okay? So that's from 2 weeks ago. just to follow up on that. So obviously, I might mention this again at the end of class because not everyone's here. If you know anyone who's not here, let them know, because I'm not going to send an email blast or anything like that. It's just I'll tell you all as I see you. All right. So we're going to also cover the last topic for this next test. The test, which is on Tuesday, is over chapters 11, 12, and 13. Chapter 13 could have easily been 4 chapters, right? So if you think about, well, the first test was over, 8, 9 chapters, something like that. This one's only over 3. It's the same amount of material. So I just wanted to emphasize chapter 13 is a really big chapter that included what we talked about: consciousness, memory, genetics, medicine, and now longevity. Longevity I chose to be the last one to sort of tie this up a little bit, because it brings about a question that came up on Tuesday, but will also comes up a little bit when we think about ethics and lab and things like this. It's going to come up again when we talk more about the future. At the end of the class, we're going to talk about future shock or looking into the future, those kinds of things. And we'll come back to some of these biological technologies, biotechnologies, that we've been talking a little bit about during this section. And one of those is longevity. Do you want to live longer? Right? How long would you like to live? I mean, it's sort of a question where most of us, none of us want to think about when we want to die. But if we think about how long we want to live, we start thinking, well, I'm not sure I want to live forever. 100 years, 200 years? Would you want to live 300 years? If you could? Healthy, I mean. Live that long and still be healthy. There are a lot of researchers, a lot of doctors and scientists who sort of consider aging like a disease. We get old, we age because of our cells getting weaker due to disease and environmental impacts and some genetic factors, that if we could fix those things, we could just keep replacing our cells the way we do most of our life. We're born, we grow by adding cells, we eventually stop growing, but we continue to replace cells constantly throughout our lives. But eventually we just start making more mistakes when we copy those cells. And so the cells end up with being cancer cells, or they just don't function as well as they used to, and we end up in some kind of decline, right? A lot more pulled muscles and all
I've seen like a special on TV. Some scientists said that they're trying to manipulate the cells because the cells have a certain number of times to replicate and
right.
Stop. And they said they can change it and they'll keep replicating.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're talking about here. Being able to fix that sort of, there's some genes that control that kind of thing. There's also an idea, if you look at the certain part of your, not the chromosome so much, but where the chromosomes become attached during cellular division, or there are things called telomeres, and as they shorten, your cells tend to make more mistakes and not regenerate as well. So you can have your telomeres tested. If they're long, you have a longer lifespan. If they're shorter, you're getting closer to where you might want to start writing a will, right? Now, anyway, these are some interesting lines of research, and we're just sort of beginning. I'm going to take sort of 3 different perspectives on longevity, at least in this class. Also, I want to point out one of the lines. I don't have enough time to really do as much in here, but in this week's discussion board is the one on neoevolution, I believe, right? or it was last anyway. The discussion board on neoevolution is very interesting. And I would have shown that video probably in the ethics lab that we missed, but I encourage you to think about that. All right, so right now, before we start talking a little bit about extending life, let's talk a little bit about what is life. Because I mentioned before, it's actually kind of hard to pin down when you think of viruses and things like that. We looked at the laws of biology, which are the cell theory, that all organisms are based on cells. All cells come from cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. Now, we can now make synthetic cells that function, that reproduce, that do all the things a cell is supposed to do. We make them completely from scratch in the laboratory. Is that alive? Are those cells alive? Right? By all the definitions that I just listed, or any other definition that we have ever used in biology, they would be, right? Because they can exchange gases and nutrients with their environment. They can replicate and make copies of themselves. They have all the, again, cellular functions of a regular cell, but they were made completely by scratch. Now, again, this brings up a lot of questions. And I'd throw it out there because, again, along with the ethics discussion or lab that we talked about and all the other discussions, it's something to think about. How about the mouse with the ear growing on his back? Have y'all seen that video? It's getting a little dated right now, but the idea is that you could grow organs. That's a human ear growing on the back of that mouse. Excuse me. And it could be removed and then transplanted onto somebody who'd lost their ear in battle or in an accident. And it would not be rejected because it is that person's own ear. You take the person's own cells and you use those to grow the ear. You need something living to keep the blood pumping through it while it's growing. So in this case they used a mouse. But you don't have to have a mouse anymore. You could just grow it in a test tube. There are a lot of videos of hearts and lungs and other organs that are now being grown in test tubes, to put it sort of generally, that are actually made from your own cells and that are viable and can be transplanted. And the benefit of that is, of course, you don't reject them. There was a movie a few years ago called The Island, I think it was, where it was an island full of clones of rich people. And when the rich people needed a new liver or a new lung, they would kill their clones and harvest the organ. And of course, a couple of the clones figured this out. They thought they were on this great island, and when they reached a certain point in their life, they would get to go to an even better place, you know, but instead they were being killed and harvested, having their organs harvested. So this eliminates any of that sci-fi type problem. We don't have to have clones. We just have to have our organs grown for us. And that may be something in the future where if you need a new liver, you go to a lab and they take a few cells and they grow a new liver on a scaffold of either synthetic material or more likely a pig's liver or something like that, and then you have your own liver. Yes?
Have they tried that yet on a human?
They've done it with certain things, not as complex as a liver or a heart, or I think maybe a lung, but I'm not positive about that. But definitely an esophagus has been grown and replaced. Ears, things like that. Cartilage, those kinds of things are pretty simple and straightforward. If it gets really more complicated, like a liver, that takes a lot more work. I'm not sure they're there yet where they're ready to actually transplant those, but they're getting closer. And again, it's right down the street in Baylor College of Medicine where a lot of this research is going on. Now, I'm not going to show the video, but I encourage you, there's links here. Both of these pictures are links to videos. You might want to watch it on your own. To do this, what you have to, if you take a heart and you basically dissolve all the cells away, you're left with a skeleton of sorts, a soft skeleton of sinew and other connective tissues that can then be used as to regrow new cells. If you then put new cells on that, they'll differentiate the way they're programmed to, so to speak, to become all the different specialized cells of the heart, the muscles, the arteries and veins, and so on. So it's really pretty amazing. These are the kinds of things that are coming about, right? We can make DNA, RNA, we can design it however we want. We can start using those things. I was having discussions with some of my upper level students yesterday about the dino chicken idea. The idea of going into a chicken, basically turning off the chicken genes and turning on the dinosaur genes, because chickens share a lot of genes with their ancestral dinosaurs. And the idea for that isn't to produce a dino chicken. It will be interesting to see what comes of that. But the technology that they're working on is the ability to turn genes on and off, to sort of manipulate which genes express and which don't. So eventually we may be able to go into your own DNA and turn off a gene that's causing you some problems, or turn on a gene that might help you in some other way, or make a gene and just put it in there and make you healthier. Yes?
The problem though is too, there's still so much interaction between genes and environment. How can they know which genes exactly will need to be modified?
Well, that's a good question, and that's where the Human Genome Project is probably, and I'll say this, and I want you to think about this going forward. The Human Genome Project is ushering in a greater revolution in science than any other project or discovery ever has. And that's a pretty bold statement, because the early quantum mechanics and Einstein's theories of relativity, which have ushered in all the computer age, the nuclear age, all of the modern technology that relies on quantum technology for communications and so on, that's pretty dramatic. But we are on the verge of a more explosive revolution in biology because of the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project allows us to do exactly what you're questioning. We can identify each gene, we can study it and determine exactly what it does, exactly how it interacts with the environment, and then we can manipulate those genes. Now, we're developing that technology now. I'm not saying tomorrow, but over the next 20 years, you're going to be seeing a lot of these things hit the market, come true. Yes?
Is this a part of stem cell experiments?
Not really. It's beyond stem cells, well beyond stem cells. Stem cells were really useful for a while because they were the cells that could be manipulated to become any other cell. And so you could take a stem cell and create muscle cells or heart cells or nerve cell, whatever you needed to study. And the idea was that if you could develop that technology to the point you could replace those cells or fix those cells in the body and get rid of diseases, get rid of autoimmune diseases, get rid of all kind of degenerative diseases. That's not really necessary anymore because we don't need the stem cells anymore. You can take you can take a regular somatic cell now and make it a stem cell. That technology was developed a few years ago. So you may have noticed that whole stem cell controversy has sort of gone away. Right? We don't hear about it much anymore. For a long time it was a big deal. And it's still one to think about because it could instruct us on all these issues that are coming to face us soon. Because we have to make similar decisions. Is it ethical to take stem cells from a fetus to try to do research to cure diseases? If the fetus is one of a few that are stored at a fertility clinic that are not going to be implanted, is it moral to take that basic embryo and take the stem cells in order to do medical research? A lot of people thought, no, that's immoral. This could become a human being, so we don't have the right of deciding that it's not going to, be viable or not. Other people said it's absolutely imperative that we do that. It would be immoral not to, because people are suffering and dying from diseases that we could potentially cure simply by using these stem cells. So we had a pretty far divide over that issue. And we're going to be facing similar issues going forward. You'll see some people who will say it's morally imperative that we look into improving ourselves through neoevolution. If we can genetically manipulate talents and skills, creativity, we should. Other people will go the opposite way and say, oh my goodness, are you kidding? We can't play God. That's totally immoral. Now, both arguments have, I won't say merit, but they have logic behind them. I mean, you can make those cases. This is not a simple emotional reaction one way or the other. We have to, as a society, think about this and decide. And that's why I really want to emphasize these things in here, not because I'm not trying to scare you or anything, I'm just trying to prepare you. We are all going to be making these decisions in the next few decades. There are panels considering these things that make recommendations. There are governmental agencies that are exploring these things that will make recommendations. There are industries exploring these technologies that will try to market different things. And we as consumers will be able to decide whether we want to consume those things or not, but we also have to support the political process or any other process where it comes down to should this be allowed or not. Like currently, it's against the law to make a human clone, to clone a human being. It's against the law in the United States. It's not against the law everywhere in the world. And there are people around the world who have said, we are going to do that. And some conspiracy theories say they already have. But at some point, if we do all of a sudden hear a confirmed case of a human being having been cloned, what does that mean for us as a society? And how do we manage that? Again, here in the United States, we make one decision. In another country, they make a different decision. What do we do? That person grows up, becomes an adult, productive citizen, moves to the U.S. Do they have the same rights that any other immigrant would have? These are a lot of issues that aren't based on science. The science behind it is going to make these issues relevant to all of us, but the issues that we have to decide as a society are beyond science. Yes?
But could our debates potentially hold up science or hold up, approval? Because, we've got all these great discoveries, but it seems like we just hear so much about, and this could happen and this could happen, but there's still so much, political process and things to go to for it to be a reality.
Yes, definitely. Politics hold up science all the time. And this is one area where that did happen to stem cells, right? Stem cell research was limited to a certain number of cell lines that had already been established, only a few of which were really viable. And so it held up that research for a long time. I'm saying that's good or bad. That might have been, right? It may be the correct, that's exactly what I'm saying, is there are going to be situations where we have to decide, no, we need to put a stop to that. Let's not do that anymore. We made a decision back in the 70s or 80s not to make neutron bombs, a type of atomic bomb that would only kill living things and leave all the buildings standing. Wouldn't have destroyed buildings or infrastructure. So the idea being you could bomb another country and then just move in behind them. Take over, no destruction of buildings. Well, we decided, no, that dehumanizes war too much. Right? The destruction has to be part of the decision or else it's too easy to be inhumane. So we made that decision. We make these kinds of decisions all the time. And we have to continue to make these kinds of decisions. And we need to make them wisely because we don't want to lose out on a technology that might be beneficial, that we misunderstood the issues, perhaps. But they're real issues. And again, I'm not trying to push you one way or the other on these issues.
I know you have to get on with the lecture.
Yeah.
Dr. Holbert, I'm just thinking, how can we, and this goes with a lot of other decisions that we make as a society. How can we destroy a city and say that we want to be humane?
Well, it's levels of humanity, I think, right? Obviously, war itself is not particularly humane, but we have always, along the course of history, made some decisions about lines to draw even in warfare, right? The Geneva Protocols and things like that, where we've all decided globally, if you capture a prisoner, they deserve to be treated a certain way and not tortured. And those things still happen, but that's what I'm talking about. So along those lines of making a decision about if we were to use a nuclear weapon and have justified that somehow, it crosses the line to use a weapon that would allow us to move in behind and just take over, because and you can sort of see how it becomes too easy to use that weapon. I mean, it dehumanizes the person even more to use a weapon like that. So those are the kinds of, and again, we are going to be faced with a lot of these kinds of things in the near future, a lot of these decisions. And a lot of them will have economic imports. The neoevolution idea, for instance, if you were given the choice, when you are going to you make your decision to have children, and you went to your doctor and said, oh, we're going to have children. They said, okay, well, how smart do you want them to be? How tall do you want them to be? Do you want them to be athletes? An athlete? Do you want them to be creative? What do you want for your kid? Oh, fill out this checklist. I want my kid to have this IQ and be really good at art, and my other kid, I'm going to make him a good athlete. Would you make those decisions for your kids? Okay, maybe you wouldn't. If you could afford, now this is not going to be cheap to make these decisions, right? These are going to be things that you can pay for. Who can afford to pay for that and who can't? Now, we already have issues in our society with the top 1% issue. Now the top 1% is going to all have designer kids. And the rest of us are going to be stuck with, well, I don't say stuck. That's the wrong issue. But we're going to have, the way it is now, right? I mean, again, every word I'm thinking of in my head is wrong. I mean, I don't mean to call, but that's the idea, right? If the rich all of a sudden have access to technologies that can make them healthier or genetically engineered, whereas that's a very expensive thing and other people can't, or even if the middle classes can afford it but the poor can't. Oh my goodness, right? I mean, what are we doing in society if we're allowing for these kinds of things? So these are things that we have to start thinking about. We already have fertility clinics that will allow you to pick the eye color and the hair color and things like that, which are considered, superficial and not important, really, because they're not really that important, right? I mean, so let a few, I don't know what to call them, yuppie kinds of families pick their hair color, eye color of their kids. It doesn't hurt anybody, really. Anyway, I'm just saying that's already available. One of the things we have to be careful of is, laws don't exist ahead of time. There are no laws right now to prevent that. Should there be? Okay, if that started, do we need to think ahead and start thinking about laws that will limit the amount of changes that we allow, during development, that kind of thing? All right, this is the technology that allows for this. I have to tell you about this because it's again revolutionized the process of looking at our genes and studying genes and giving us the ability to manipulate genes, and that is the polymerase chain reaction. The polymerase chain reaction has been around for a long time. This is how we do DNA fingerprinting. It's how they figured out the human genome, by making copies of genes and then isolating specific genes and being able to say, okay, this is where this gene is on this chromosome and so on. So it's getting better and better and better at this, and again, I'm just sort of laying the groundwork for where we might be going. I did just a couple things. Again, this slide's getting pretty old now, so I have stem cells and cloning and things like this on here. Not that these are gone away, but they're less of an issue than they used to be because of new developments, particularly the ability to grow stem cells from non-embryonic source cells. No one really has a problem with that, right? You take a cell out of your bone marrow and turn it back to a stem cell and then make it whatever you want it to be. That doesn't challenge people's morality very often, but embryonic stem cells did. Cloning, there's a difference between human cloning and what's called therapeutic cloning. All right, if you were, let's say you had a diseased liver, you could take healthy liver cells and clone them and then put them back and cure your liver. Most people don't have much of a problem with that. If you take your own cells and you clone them, but just for a specific cell type, that's different than making a whole individual. And there was a Woody Allen movie called Sleeper. I've mentioned it before when we talked about nutrition. The other part of that movie was the idea that there was this dictator that had been assassinated. He'd blown up, but they still had his nose. And so they were going to clone this dictator from his nose. And but somebody stole the nose. And so anyway, it was the whole thing about whether the good guys or bad guys could get a hold of the nose and prevent this dictator from being cloned. Anyway, so those kinds of things, right? I mean, the idea's been around for a long time. It's not that movie's made in the 70s. We've had these technologies for a fairly long time. All right, the other issue, why do we age? And we've mentioned it before, your cells are sort of pre-programmed to make copies of themselves so many times. But more than that, if we could take away every other factor other than that, we still would probably live much longer than we do today. We'd live to be 100, and I think some of the estimates are 150 to 200, maybe even 300 years old, if we just could eliminate all of the other damage done to cells during our lifetimes. So if we could just let our cells keep copying themselves naturally, we'd probably have enough to live much longer, twice as long or 3 times as long as we do now. But what happens is during our lifetimes we accumulate damage. We're exposed to a number of things. Get away from that microphone a little bit. We're exposed to a lot of things that damage our cells. Now, we typically think of carcinogens, for instance, and so that's an easy one to think about, because what a carcinogen does is it makes the cell not make a good copy of itself. And if that new cell can't control that rate, it just keeps copying itself and it keeps growing into a tumor. And it's not doing what it's supposed to do. It's not acting like a muscle cell or a nerve cell or a liver cell or whatever the cancer is attacking. And of course the number one carcinogen is still tobacco. And particularly some of the, not just smoking, but chewing and whatever source of tobacco, there's stuff in there that can lead, that's cancerous. Your diet provides most of the other sources of things. Eating charred meats, that black, I mean, I love it. It's what makes it good. Hot dog, I want my hot dog pretty charred. But anyway, that's not really very healthy because it releases things into my bloodstream that can lead to some damage. We take antioxidants in our daily lives now most of the time, or we buy foods that are rich in antioxidants for this reason, because what these things are doing is they're releasing free radicals that can oxidize our cells, and if we take an antioxidant, we can help eliminate that or help avoid that. All right, so there are a lot of other things, occupational hazards and so on, that can lead to cell damage. But we're always battling this, and we're always battling the fact that oxygen is a double-edged sword. We need it. We breathe oxygen. We use it in every cell of our body to make energy, but it's also attacking our cells just like it would metal or anything else. I mean, it's rusting us. We're rusting away slowly over time. That's one way of looking at aging. So what can we do about it? And as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about 3 things that might be potential avenues to keep your eye on. One, medicine. The idea that we can treat aging as a disease and look for ways to treat it that way. So we may be looking at, again, ways of either protecting ourselves from damage or fixing the damage done to our cells. Whether it's genetics or not, these kinds of treatments may allow us to live much longer. We already have seen this. So this is not new. This is the strategy we've been using. We've already doubled our life expectancy since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Now, people have lived longer. We can look back at literature or anything else and see examples of people who lived a long time, but not on average. On average, people died before they were 40, up until fairly recently. But again, in the last century and a half, the average life expectancy has been rising pretty steadily and is pretty close to 80 now. That's why I say we've more or less doubled our age.
What are we going to do with Methuselah? Was that Methuselah that lived almost 1,000 years old?
Well, that's one of the questions to consider, is if we all start living a lot longer, what does that mean for our economy?
But did he?
Oh, no. I mean, that's. Okay. I'm not going to go back to I'm not going to speak to that because there's no way to answer that scientifically or anything like that. I mean, it's a historical record, right? This is the line of reasoning that thinks we might be able to live to closer to 300 years old if we can fix a lot of things and prevent damage that's being done to our cells. There are other people looking for ways to live even longer, and that's the technology side of things. If we start supplementing our bodies with technology, or ultimately, if Ray Kurzweil is right, develop a computer that could basically house our consciousness, we live forever, potentially. I mean, we may not live forever in this body. We might be living in a either a, I won't say cloned body is not quite the right word, but a sort of mixture of a cyborg type of thing, or a computer. There was an old Star Trek episode I remember where the guy had done this, and he was just in a computer, but he was, the consciousness of somebody. So again, it's not a new idea. It's been around for a long time. That was the Star Trek TV show, not the movies. That was 60s something, late 60s. And none of that was based on any really new ideas. I mean, again, if you look at science fiction, then most of these ideas came about in the 50s with the golden age of science fiction. Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and people like that. So we've been playing around with these ideas for a long time. And there are people who are predicting that we're actually getting pretty close to that possibility. Computer intelligence that might not only mimic human intelligence, but allow us to integrate with our devices in ways that will make us more intelligent. Yes?
I saw yesterday they created the hoverboard from
Yeah.
the future.
I heard something about that.
They have video. It's just like, it's too loud and stuff. They're just trying to get it right.
Right.
But it works.
But it works on the magnetism, right?
Right.
Levitate, yeah. Rather than just a lot of air, it works by levitating. And we'll talk more about superconductivity and those issues next section. And you'll see a video or two by Ray Kurzweil. He's basically, well, I'll talk more about him later. I'll let that sit there for a while. But one of the points he makes is that we already integrate ourselves with our technology. We just don't do it directly. But none of us rely upon our own memories anymore. We all use computers, right? None of us talk to each other directly much anymore. We all call on our phones and things like that. So we're already using technology in a way that is replacing things that we used to do ourselves. And his point is that we'll continue to do that, but the technology will become more and more integrated into us. There's another scientist who has taken a computer chip and implanted it in his arm. And he can program it so that as soon as he walks in a room, the lights come on or they go off when he leaves, or, it's sort of the ultimate smart house control. He also, at one point, put a chip in his wife's arm, and they could communicate without talking to each other. It was sort of a sympathetic communication, not verbal, but maybe getting there, right? And it's gone farther than that. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that too. If you have a computer chip in your back of your head, I guess there's other science fiction things where they've done that. Neuromancer, if you've read the book. That's an interesting idea. Let's say if you have that computer chip, if you wanted to learn how to do calculus, you'd just download the program and you'd know how to do calculus. You wouldn't have to sit here all this time anymore, 4 years just to get a degree. You could get one in 20 minutes. Just download it. That's a nice idea, right? Well, what if somebody hacked into that? Yeah. We have to think about these kinds of things. Because that was another one. This guy puts the chip in. A few years later, somebody showed how they could hack into it. Now, this is all still, experimental stuff. But I'm just throwing it out there because who knows where this is going to go. We never really know at more than about 15 years in the future where things are going to be. The last one I'm going to bring up is the most realistic one that we can actually all maybe work for right now, and that is our lifestyle. There have been a lot of studies done, and again, there was a Nova or something about this, the documentary, and there's a link to it, I think on the National Geographic. And these are all links too, so if you follow these and watch these videos. You can study populations around the world where there are individuals who seem to live longer than the majority of us, than the standard life expectancy. People who live into their hundreds, right? And we all sort of have this, we know about these types of people, but they occur all over the place. They're not limited to Asia or Europe, Mediterranean area, even parts of the United States. But there's three things they all have in common that are interesting. One, they walk, they move, right? They don't use they don't drive their cars a lot. They have communities where they can walk to the store, they can walk to what they need. They spend a lot more time walking and moving around. So a lot of these areas tend to be poorer areas, and I mean that geopolitically, not just in the U.S., but areas where people are still relying upon their local stores, their local businesses, their local resources, including their food sources. The other thing is that they eat local food. They don't go to grocery stores. They have gardens, or they go to farmers markets, or they have again, communities where they're still growing all the food that they eat. So there's two things about that. Local foods are probably more, you're more adapted to local foods in terms of your antigens and your blood's reaction to those things, but also they tend to be fresher and no preservatives, none of the other chemicals and stuff that we get in the foods that we eat, no added high fructose corn syrup. Right? If you're eating natural foods, you're eating a much healthier diet. So natural foods, moving around a lot more, and the third thing is they're socially connected, not through their cell phones, but through their neighbors. I mean, they talk to their neighbors. They have larger families, extended families that stay close together. When I think about my family, I've got a sister in Ohio. I only have one sister, but my wife has 6 brothers and sisters, and one's in Indiana, Austin, Florida. I mean, we get spread out, right? So if we're going to come together, we have sort of come together on Thanksgiving. It's a big effort. It's not going to happen that often. Once a year or so, big family reunions we have every so often where everyone comes together. But people who are the longest lived have that all the time. They're surrounded by that extended community all the time. So these 3 things, and it tells us a lot about ourselves and our health, I think, to think about these 3 things. We are social animals. We do need social interaction. I mean, it's obvious, I think, one reason why social media is so popular. It gives us some level of connections that we may not have had as we get all spread out. It allows us to keep some of those connections. But face-to-face is better than over the phone or over a computer interface. Skype is great. I mean, I remember as a kid, that was one of those things where we thought that was way in the future, being able to have a real-time telephone conversation. I mean, that was science fiction. That was Jetsons kinds of stuff. And not only did it happen, but it's now so cheap and easy, it's free. It's pretty amazing. But it's still not as good as actually being there face-to-face, right? I mean, it's healthier for us. Our brains actually react chemically to the presence of other people, particularly people that we're close to. Eating a healthier local diet. And there's a lot of, this organic movement and things like that. And I'm not advocating too strongly for that. A little bit I am. But I mean, we got to be realistic too. But if we can make some of the choices along this way, and I think probably the more important one is to just be more active. Just move. Take the stairs. I get on the elevator if it's more than 3 flights up. I always go down the stairs. But I always get on the elevator and I'm always nervous that somebody's going to get on and go 1 floor, right? I mean, come on. 1 floor. Take the stairs. And I see all these young, healthy kids getting on the elevator to go 1 floor. They're like, oh man, come on. Now, again, if I go up more than 3 flights, I start to get winded. But 2 or 3 flights of stairs, it's faster for me anyway. So that's just a personal choice. And again, I'm not saying, but these are the recommendations. You'll even see them on the elevators where they'll say, take the stairs, be active. Our own department, the Student Health Services or whatever that puts out all those things and their workshops. And so pay attention to that stuff. It really does make a difference just to move around a little bit. So the next time you have to walk from the parking lot, think about how healthy that is. Oh, good, I'm moving around. I'm actually getting some benefits from this. Because it is, if you can park closer, you can park closer. But anyway, it does help your brains loosen up a little bit and start working a little bit better before you get over here. All right. Well, that's all that I'm going to really cover. The rest of the slides, again, like the last one, are going over a lot of the biology about all this. That's in the book, and you can spend some more time with that. I'm not going to try to put all this on top of you. But I've used the term homeostasis before, and this is a term that you should at least be thinking about. All of these things have to do with homeostasis. How does our body maintain itself in a balanced, healthy state? And if you're challenged, for instance, if it's hot outside, your body needs to maintain a constant body temperature. What does your body do to keep itself cool? it sweats. If it's cold outside, what does your body do to stay at the temperature? It shivers, right? So you've got these mechanisms, they're called feedback mechanisms, to keep your body at a healthy state. You eat too much sugar, your body releases insulin. You don't get enough sugar, it can release sugar from the glycogen, stores of glycogen and fat, and so on. So that's homeostasis. And again, we've talked a lot about nutrition and things like that, so I'll just flip through. These are the slides again. You can go in and look at these things on your own. All right. So we have time for the quiz. We also have time for me to remind everybody that there is the lab. You came in late. The bioethics lab that I assigned when I couldn't be here a couple weeks ago. I've gotten as many links as I think I'm going to get, and so I chose one. I put the link in here. It's not live, but if you cut and paste this link into a browser, read that article, and then make a comment. Leave a, like you would on any of the other discussion boards. Now, this one's not going to be open forever. I have it open through the 31st, through Halloween, or through the end of the month. And so anyway, you might want to get on this one. All right? The test on Tuesday is over the Life Sciences unit, which is 3 chapters, 11, 12, and 13. Yes?
If you go to the grade book, it'll be faster.
It's faster to show you all
little
this?
components.
All right.
I mean, what, to the students?
What's that?
Students? We should show you. Go to the grades, because that's how I do it. That's how I get it there.
Okay, that's good. Now I'm logged in as me, so it may look a little bit different.
It might be different.
I don't know what the differences are exactly, but I sort of like our little galaxy system here. So
13 has like 6 quizzes in it. It's a very big read.
13,
How
yes.
do we bring that down for the test to know what to study and not have just a bunch of...
Well, again, there within this chapter, the different sections that we've separated out in lecture are genetics, the mismeasure of man, and there's genetics. So genetics, mismeasure of man. So if you think of these as sort of different chapters, again, it's the same amount of material as the first one. It's just all in one chapter.
We've done 4, so it's going to be what, about 5?
Within this chapter, I think, again, there's genetics, longevity, medicine, mismeasure of man. So there's 4 or 5 lectures that were within this one chapter, yeah. And then we had the evolution chapter and the biodiversity chapter. All right, so there's the longevity section. Here's the longevity quiz. Oh no, that's the medicine quiz. Hold on, we'll get to the longevity quiz. Here's the longevity quiz. Homeostasis occurs when the body is fighting disease. Is that true or false? That's true. I mean, that's one thing. As I said, anytime your body is sort of attacked by an infectious agent, you have to fight against it to maintain homeostasis. You're trying to keep the body where it normally is. Now, one of the mechanisms your body might use is fever, right, which is not a homeostatic state, but it's a strategy to get back to that state by getting rid of, making it harder for the disease organism. So that's true. The Earth's carrying capacity for people has been determined to be 6 billion. I think we've had this one or a similar one before. We hope not, right? Because we're already past that. Carrying capacity, if you remember from the biodiversity chapter, is how many individuals can the environment sustain, right? How much nutrients and space and all the other characteristics that are needed for organisms to survive, how much of that is available, and you can figure out sort of how many individuals can be supported. For people, we haven't figured out what our carrying capacity is, because our expectation is that even if we fill up the Earth, well, we'll just move on to Mars or wherever else, right? We'll start terraforming some other planet. At least that's our hopeful, one hopeful strategy or expectation. So that's false. And again, we have already exceeded 6 billion people on the planet, so it's growing very fast. All right. Most of these questions are from the part that I didn't show you, but they're in the chapters. But again, we're going through these. I haven't had a chance to update all of my quizzes. Viviparity is the strategy of live birth, and that's false. Well, no, that's true. Sorry, that's true. There's 3 types of birth. There's ovipary, which is egg laying. There's ovivivipary, which is an egg that hatches internally and then a live young is given birth to. And there's vivipary, which is live birth. So yes, that's true. And I didn't go through that, but that is in the book. Okay, number 4, nitrogen is a common limiting factor in most environments. This is true. This is why when we put fertilizers on our lawn and it gets washed into a river or a lake, it can cause eutrophication, because the algae say, oh wow, look, nitrogen, and that blooms and it uses up all the oxygen and kills everything else. Because it's normally not enough nitrogen there. It's limiting. And 5, PCR stands for pulmonary cardioresuscitation.
False.
That's false. CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. But PCR is polymerase chain reaction. So that's false. Submit that answer. Well, it's finished. Yes, for sure. And we got them all right. All right. See you guys on Tuesday, or some of you in lab in a few minutes, the rest of you on Tuesday.